Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, bringing you episode 3 of my War Thunder tutorial series for arcade mode that I like to call TX's Tips. In today's installment we're going to be covering exactly how I managed to climb to higher altitudes at the start of the game and during the course of a game. Now it's a technique that you guys may already be using, however if you're interested stay tuned and we'll see what we can get up to. With that being said, let's get down to business. Okay, so to start off with, we're fielding our Spitfire Mark 9, a personal favourite of mine, and I'm going to show you just a basic demonstration of how I go from being at say 1000 metres up to 3000 metres in as quick a period as possible using my own climbing technique. At which point following that, I'm going to break it down and give you an insight into how I use this technique with both the Spitfire and of course other planes. Just start off at 1000 metres and go into 3000, and we begin in 3, 2, 1, and here we go. Okay, so we had a little bit of a splutter from the engine at the end there. I think I miscalculated one of my wet sprints. That's just a basic demonstration of the technique. Now, we're going to break this down a little bit by rinsing and repeating, but I'll take it in intervals. The first thing you probably note is that I do not hold down wet for a continuous period of time until my wet usage is barred, i.e. when I get the 100% in grey appear. The reason I do this, well there's two reasons actually. Firstly, because I dislike hearing the engine splutter all over the place, and secondly because I like to always have a little bit of wet on hand just in case I get into any tricky situations when I start to level out. Have you seen in a number of my review videos, I've always got a little bit of wet left, so if I have to go straight into a dogfight I can always implement war emergency power rather than having to rely solely on the 100% output of the engine mid dogfight. However, of course, you can climb to higher altitudes just by constantly using wet, although it's something I dislike. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but each to their own. So, let's come about and we'll break this down. The whole idea I rely on here is that I climb at a given angle. It's usually 20 to 25 degrees, and I do not pick this angle specifically. I go with what feels right. Having played thousands of flyouts, I've finally sort of got an approximate angle. It's somewhere between 20 to 25 degrees, and I'll depict it here. I'm going to start now. The first thing is, whatever altitude you start at the beginning of the game, take note of it. In the Spitfire, I like to start off by climbing 500 metres using web from that given altitude. So I'm going to slow it down a little bit, so we're at 1000 here. Okay, so we start to climb. Now my climb angle here is approximately 24 degrees. It's a typical angle that I use, and as I say, I whip 500 metres and out 1500 and give the engine 300 metres to cool off, at which point I kick back in for another 400 metres of wep usage in terms of altitude change. Gives us time for the engine to cool down, allowing us to recuperate some wep and bring it back in. At 2200 metres we stop, give another 300 metre break and bring it back in at 2500 metres. As you can see, during the intervals without wep we lose our speed, but we gain it back just as quickly when we are implementing wep. So now I'm going to hold this down for another 400 metres to 2900 and do the last 100 metres solely on the power of the engine. As you can see, quite a simple technique, and we've gone for 1,000 to 1,000 to 3,000 meters in quite a short period of time. Let us compare the two techniques. Now, a lot of players will simply use the same sort of climbing angle, however hold down WEP for a very long period of time. My comparison will be in terms of how long it takes to get from 1,000 to 3,000 at the same climb angle of approximately 24 degrees. Of course, I can't simulate the perfect starting speed and all that, and I haven't got the time to. However, I should be able to give you a rough estimate here. So just braking some speed, dropping some altitude. Braking a little bit more speed, this is going to take a little bit of time. Okay. There we are. So we're going to get our speed back up to approximately 400 kilometers an hour and our altitude to 1,000 meters. Just level out. Kick it in a little bit. Okay, we're going to drop our altitude. Okay, here we go. Now I'm doing this solely using WEP, and as you can see we're back at 24 degrees approximately for a climb angle. Now exceeding the 500 meters, I should get the splutter kicking at about 700, i.e. 1,700 meters. Eventually stalling out at 1,900 meters or 2,000. There it is, that's the first stall. Of course, now we're vulnerable to being attacked and not having the ability to use WEP in order to enhance our performance. However, this gap is quite temporary, and just before 2,400 meters we're able to bring the WEP back in, although we've lost a significant amount of speed and we were vulnerable for a short period of time. Again, carrying on with the WEP, it'll probably start coughing out at about 3,000 meters. As I predicted, dead on 3,000 meters. So, I'll do a comparison of the times. If you just give me a couple of seconds to go check that over. Having reviewed the two videos so far, it's worth noting that my technique, which I refer to as power climbing, came with a climb time at 24 degrees from 1,000 meters to 3,000 meters of 1 minute and 1 second. Meanwhile, the continual use of WEP, including the recharge periods, came with a climb time of 1 minute. So the two techniques are rather comparable in that regard. So, having said that, I'm going to now show you a climb from 1,000 meters to 4,500 meters. A climb which in my opinion is the most important one at the start of a ground strike game if you want to catch those pesky bombers at the start rather than have to climb up towards them when they've gained a huge portion of altitude on you. Just building my speed up and getting set at approximately 1,000 meters. We're going to brake into this. And here we go. Now we're at 25 degrees this time. And I'm starting off with my technique, the power climbing. Open up with that 5,000 meter dash. Cooling off for 300 meters. And then I'm going to kick back in for another 400 meter dash with the WEP. Cool it off for another 300. Now boost for another 400 meters. Up to 2,900 meters that would be. .300 meter cool off as per usual. At this point our climb speed is now starting to drop a little bit, simply because we're running out of overall speed and we're gaining altitude. Now we'll be dashing up to 3,600 meters here. As you can see, we are no longer gaining speed when we're using WEP. Instead we're actually losing speed quite a bit. So now what I do to make up for this deficit, I only give a 200 meter gap. And at 3,800 I'm going to push all the way for 4,200 meters. It's going to be quite a strain on the engine, and I may cause it to almost run out of WEP. In fact, I'll call it at 4,100 metres because I can hear it starting to splutter. Call it off at just 100 to 200 metres. I'll make it 200 here, although we're on the risk of stalling. Just on the verge. Can we make the last 200 metres? Yep, we can. And we're just gaining a little bit of speed. Okay, we're almost there. Come on, old girl. There we are. Now we're going to do that again, but this time we're going to do it by just holding down WEP, and I'm going to show you the difference in the time between the two. Okay, so we're now on the verge of starting the climb using the continuous WEP method. Just building my speed and altitude at the same time. I'm going to cut back on the throttle a little bit to ensure I get to 1,000 metres. Okay. Cut the throttle again, just overshot it a little bit. Okay. Okay, we're all set to go really now. We're approximately 1,000 metres. Here we go. Again, a roughly 25-degree climb angle. And as I say, this time I am just literally holding down WEP continuously. So I'm not taking my finger off my WEP key, which is shift in my case. And we'll see how quickly this climb occurs. Remember, we're going to 4,500 metres from 1,000 metres in order to simulate going from spawn to bomber altitude in a rank 3 or higher, approximately, ground strike match. The technique is holding up, of course, up to 3,000 metres, but the difference comes in when we start hitting above 3,000 metres, when our climb rate starts to skew a little bit, and additionally our plane hasn't got as much lift, nor as much speed in general. That's when the difference comes in. We're already up to 3,000 metres, quite quickly in fact. However, now the problems are going to start arising because we're going to lose quite a portion of our speed during this cooldown phase. As you can see, we're now dropping our speed like we experienced with my technique. Up at 3,600, I get the feeling that it's going to conk out at approximately 4,000 metres. Might be before that. Yeah, it's on the verge of conking out, so it'll be about 3,950. There it goes again. And this is where the difficulty comes in. We're going to really struggle here because we're on the verge of stalling as well. We need the WEP to kick back in, as it has. Of course, really now it's all about whether we can keep it going for the last little bit. Otherwise we may have to level out early. Although that's not a problem, once you hit 4,000 metres you're already at a good altitude to intercept. Okay. So, we're almost there. 4,500 metres, we can level out. I'm now going to review the two video clips and give you a time comparison. Just hold on a second. Okay, so having reviewed the two clips, I've actually found quite an interesting conclusion. My technique, going from 1,000 to 4,500 metres at a 25-degree climb angle, came out in a climb time of 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Meanwhile, doing the same thing, but just holding down WEP continuously, came down with a climb time of 2 minutes and 10 seconds. I'm going to be honest, I had done no pre-testing prior to this, so I had to go on assumption in my original preface. I'm quite surprised that the WEP technique is a little bit faster. Now, a lot of you are going to be instantly sort of pointing the finger and wondering, well then why use your technique if holding down the WEP's the better option? Well, as I stated previously, by holding down the WEP continuously, you expose yourself to the situation where you've got no more WEP usage mid-dogfight. Meanwhile, using my technique, you'll be able to broker in a little bit of WEP, whether it's just from finishing off a stint, mid-stint, or during one of the cooldown phases, so you're a bit more competitive if you're caught during your climb. Additionally, the nice thing about the stints is that if you need to use a little bit of WEP during a cooldown phase in order to prevent yourself from stalling, you've got the ability to do so. As you saw in both climb clips, we were on the verge of stalling towards the last part of the climb period, and in some of the less energetic planes that struggle to climb as well, this can make the difference. Now I'm going to have a couple of images displayed very shortly going through my technique in a number of different planes. I'm not going to label out specific planes every time. I'll give you a couple examples of planes that I define as bad climbers and my associated stint technique, good climbers and my technique, and a good climber I would define as a Spitfire Mark 9 as shown in today's video, and finally some great climbers where all three types of plane have different sets of techniques, and these techniques can be expanded to heavy fighters and perhaps even bombers, although I've never really used the technique for bombers because they're quite heavy. Still, let's get down to some good old images. Beginning with bad climbers, examples including the F4F Wildcats, the A6M2N variant, and indeed the Hurricanes Mark 1 and Mark 2. We insert our spawn altitude, here listed as 1000 meters. I would normally use my technique as follows. I WEP to 1400 meters, i.e. a 400 meter jump due to the poor climbing ability of the plane, recharge for 300 meters, then WEP again for 300 meters. This will get us up to 2000 meters quite quickly and quite nicely, with a lot of WEP still in the chamber. Following that, we've got a 300 meter cooldown period from 2000 to 2300 meters, another WEP period taking us up to 2600 meters, and then we recharge to 2900 meters, and so on. So my technique for bad climbers really can be summed up as this. In an angle of climb of roughly 20 to 25 degrees, with my preference usually being about 23 degrees, although I do this by instinct now rather than having to check my climb angle every time, I start off with a WEP sprint distance of 400 meter altitude. Following that, I have a recharge period of 300 meters altitude, and then re-engage the WEP for 300 meters, rinse and repeat. Of course, not including the original 400 meter climb once again. We then move on to good climbers. In the case of good climbers, examples including but not limited to the Spitfire F Mark 9 as depicted in the video, the Yakovlev Yak 3, and the Focke-Wulf 190A5, we insert our spawn altitude, in this example 1000 meters, and we would WEP to 1500 meters, a slightly larger jump to start off with. Following that, we recharge the WEP for 300 meters, re-engage it for another 400 meters, and rinse and repeat, with this technique taking us up quite quickly to 3000 plus meters, as depicted in the video. Indeed, we're again using that angle climb of 20 to 25 degrees, and this technique can be summed up as follows. A 500 meter WEP stint, followed by a series of 300 meter altitude WEP cooldown intervals, and 400 meter WEP intervals. I hope you get the picture. And then we finally move on to great climbers, planes which really do surge into the sky. Examples include, but are not limited to, the F8F-1 Bearcat, the Messerschmitt 109 G6, and the Tempest Mark 5. These are all quite late ranking planes, and towards the end of the ranking system you will find that a lot of planes become great climbers, if not good ones. In this example, if we take our spawn altitude to be 1000 meters, we WEP for a very long period of 600 meters, taking us up to 1600 before recharging for another 300 meters to 1900 meters, and then I WEP for another 400, taking us up to 2300 meters, and rinse and repeat. So this technique really uses a lot of the stuff from the good climber technique, except the opening WEP sprint is significantly larger, being at 600 meters. Of course, we use an angle climb of 20 to 25 degrees, and this technique has allowed me in a number of cases to be able to engage bombers such as B-17s and indeed Wellingtons up at very high altitudes very early on in the game. Moreover, by the use of this technique as explained earlier, I've been able to combat opponents who've met me halfway up my climb with the ability to use more WEP than perhaps available if I was to use the hold down the WEP and pray that you don't get caught whilst recharging technique. Now, what I'm also going to say at this point is, if your plane is stock, for example, as you'll find commonly when you go into very high battle rating games, The bad climber technique can actually prove quite useful, simply because you won't be able to outclimb fully upgraded planes, but you'll be able to sneak off at the edge and get a little bit more altitude, and perhaps that might make the difference between you getting 1 kill and 2 kills, and speeding up your grind process for those wonderful upgrades, including that engine throttle. Still, pause the video at instances of your choosing, and take a look at these images when and where necessary. I hope they're of use to you. So, we conclude by noting that while my technique, which I refer to as power climbing, does not have the fastest time to climb, from 1000 meters to 4500 meters, by comparison with holding down WEP continuously, the time to climb from 1000 meters to 3000 meters is roughly equivalent. Moreover, while holding down WEP continuously may get you to the highest altitudes a lot faster, it can leave you in a situation where if you're intercepted mid-climb, you may not have any WEP left available, which could make the difference in that crucial one-on-one dogfight. Meanwhile, my technique guarantees that you'll have just that little bit of WEP left, if not a lot of it left, in order to pursue your foe. Of course, each to their own, and as I always say, what may work for me may not work for you. I'd also like to say that while I have given you a couple of guidelines as to bad, good and great climbers and how exactly to implement my technique, feel free to add your own variation, because we pick up things from everywhere. I've picked up some techniques from the past from players who shot me down, and you'll probably pick up something on the way too. If you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos, tips and tutorials on my channel. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.